Favorite non-magic item. Now, I mentioned yesterday quite a bit, the first part of that video, that I love the toolbox. I love having a lot of things around that are useful in a limited circumstance. But should that circumstance ever come up, I want to be prepared for it. My non-magic items are very similar, but much more applicable. I guess I'll use that word. Magic items are too niche when you're dealing with spells, like those scrolls and the wands and that. All those spells are very niche spells. And in general, spells in D&D tend to be more niche-y spells. There are some very good ones that are applicable in more than one situation, but magic effects tend to be insert, square block into square slot kind of deals. Mundane items, on the other hand, are just as awesome as any other mundane item. So whenever I play a game of D&D, you can bet that my character leaves the first town heading to the very first dungeon, very first time I ever play the character. If you let me buy equipment, I'm buying rope, a grappling hook, a fishing hook, twine, thread, needles, chalk, caltrops, a hammer, pitons, a length of chain, a mirror, all kinds of stuff, flint and steel. I am going to carry every tiny random little thing I possibly can because you never know when it's going to come in useful. In our Sunday D&D game, before I ever joined the game, the party was trying to break into some place, and they weren't able to get in because all the doors were boarded up or the windows were boarded up or something. And one of the players just happened to have a crowbar listed on his sheet. Nobody could remember why he had a crowbar, but it wasn't like it was listed at the bottom of his equipment. It was right in the middle of all of his equipment. He happened to have a crowbar. And so he says, you know what? I pull out my crowbar and I start prying the boards off. And so they were able to get in that way. That's the kind of stuff that I love doing. When you have a length of rope and a 10-foot pole and a grappling hook and your helmet, you can do so many things with that, because everything you could do in real life, those are real life objects, you can do in the game. You don't have to worry about the constraints of magic and how it's worded and all that. You just tell the DM, listen, I can tell you right now, if I broke that staff in half, that pole in half and set it up over here and tied the rope between them and blah, 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 it's going to do this, this, and this. Physics says so, So that's always fun. And the more little toolbox options you have, the better. We were in a dungeon on our Friday game, and we wanted to sleep in a room. And I was like, we're in the dungeon. I don't want to sleep in the dungeon. And they're like, no, we're safe. We cleared out this part. And I'm like, we cleared out the people that were here right now. What about the people that come back later? It's like, well, someone will be awake and they'll guard the door. I'm like, did anybody bring a hammer and pitons? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, if we had a hammer and pitons, we could spike the door shut. You hammer the pitons into the floor or the door jamb right on the door, and you can't open the door. Or you would have to really bust open the door, giving us plenty of forewarning that someone's coming in. This is standard, old-school, original D&D kind of adventuring. But nobody thought to bring hammer and pitons. Not even myself, but at the time, I spent 750 gold pieces of my money on a wand of Cure Light Wounds, so it would have been helpful if other people had the 15 gold pieces to buy a hammer and pitons. I say pitons that I have been told recently that I have pronounced another word incorrectly. This is a drug name, so not as important, but so maybe they're pitons or pitons. I don't know. I think they're called pitons. I think it's a hammer and pitons, but I could be wrong. Anyway, everything is my favorite non-magic item. Just chalk is awesome because it lets you write on the dungeon walls so you don't get lost. Twine is awesome because just like when Theseus went into the maze to slay the Minotaur, he trailed a ball of twine behind him so he could find his way back out of the maze afterwards. A needle and thread. You never know when a needle and thread's going to come in handy. Paper and ink. Now that's one where my character had paper and ink. We were in a dungeon. We found these weird symbols scrawled on the wall. And we wanted to write them down so we would remember them when we went back to town, so we could show them to a sage so that he could help us identify them. And the DM says, well, you're just going to have to memorize what they look like. And he showed us a picture and then took it back because none of you have paper and ink. And I said, I have paper and ink. It's right here on my character sheet. Totally always carry paper and ink on me because you never know when you're going to need it. So I took down the drawing and he handed us the illustration since we had now drawn it ourselves on a piece of paper. That is fun stuff. A length of chain. Never know when that's going to come in handy. DCC RPG is a beautiful example of this. I've mentioned it in other videos before. I love D&D as a puzzle to be solved. I love engaging the players on a deeper level. When you're playing D&D and you ask the players what they want to do, if they look at their character sheet, then they're doing it wrong. This happened all the time in 4th edition. Mostly this is because this is when I played with the most people. Normally you're with your same gaming group and you see the same 5 guys every weekend. In Living Forgotten Realms, where we were playing, there were 30-some people that showed up all the time, and you always sat at different tables with a different group. So I played with a lot of different people. You'd ask this guy, what would you like to do? And they all look at their character sheet and look at their skill list and then read off one of their skills. Is there some way I could do blank? That's exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. As soon as the player starts thinking in-game, that's when you get into that solving real-world traps. That's where you get into using mundane equipment in unusual or inventive ways, etc., etc. That's when you don't resolve searching a room with a die roll, but with the player actually thinking, okay, this is my mental picture of what the DM has described the room looking like. If I were to hide gold in this room, where would I hide it? And, thinking through, maybe it's under the bed taped up against, the bottom of the bed, although not tape in D&D. Maybe it's behind the dresser. There's a mirror on the wall. I'll check behind the mirror kind of stuff. That's the fun stuff. And mundane items and DCC RPG, when you run that, you do the funnel. Everybody has 3 to 4 characters. And those characters literally start with 1 weapon and 1 other item, pretty much. They get a weapon based on their class, and then they roll on the random equipment table. Oh, yeah, they get a weapon from their class, their profession. They get an item from their profession, and then they get 1 random item off of the equipment table. And I remember when I ran the funnel, the most useful items, 1 character had a chain, and another character had a bag of night soil, which is manure. And they tied the bag of night soil to the chain, and they would throw the bag of night soil ahead of them. We determined that it wasn't like a little bag, it was like a big, heavy 10-pound sack. They would throw it ahead of them and try and trigger traps on the floor. Or they would, if their door was just cracked open a little bit, they'd throw the bag against it to knock the door open and, standing back and use the chain to pull the night soil back to them. And it was by far the most useful item they had in the entire dungeon, and it exactly illustrated that kind of play, where they had to think not with their character sheets, but in their minds where their characters were, that situation, that equipment that they had. And it's very easy in DCC because you have so little equipment, you don't have to keep a ton of things memorized. You got 4 characters, they each have a weapon, but then they each only have 2 other items, rather than a whole list of items like I usually keep. In my youth, I would have said my favorite non-magic item are caltrops. Absolutely love caltrops. And you have, everyone at the table has a D4. So anybody who's never seen caltrops before can say, what's a caltrop? And then you put that on the table and you say, that's a caltrop, except it's metal and it's sharp and it's on the floor, so go ahead and try and step on it. And then they're like, I don't want to do that. And you're like, that's right. That's why I carry a bag of caltrops with me. My brother and I loved caltrops. Every one of our characters in 1st and 2nd edition carried around at least 1 bag of caltrops, if not more. And they saw tons of play. 3rd edition allowed you to get around caltrops if you were wearing certain types of armor, because you were assumed to have metal shoes. And so then the caltrops wouldn't hurt you because you'd be stepping on them with a big old iron boot. So they became a little bit less effective in 3rd edition, but still pretty cool. But overall, I mean, it's hard to pick because of how disparately useful they are. But I mean, like, chalk is right up there with a hammer and pitons, is right up there with a 10-foot pole, is right up there with a 50-foot length of rope with a grappling hook at the end. Those are some of the most useful items ever in dungeon crawling if your DM will challenge you in a way that you can use them. Too many DMs, particularly novice kind of DMs, they have the solution that they think you need to do to solve a puzzle of some sort. And some of them won't let you solve the puzzle unless you solve it the exact way they want you to. But if you use this kind of thinking, and your DM is cool with this kind of play, then any good argument is good enough. Now, I've said it before on this channel, and I'll say it again. A good DM doesn't say, no, you can't. He says, yes, but. So he allows you to, but he imposes, appropriate odds, usually in the form of a penalty. But, sometimes it's a really good idea, and you get a bonus to the roll. It's like, that is so... I never would have thought of that, but it's so awesome, or it's so fitting, or it's so obviously going to be effective that you're going to get a bonus to the roll. And I've done that before, too. So, I don't know. It's hard to say Bag of Caltrops is not my favorite non-magic item, but I think Hammer and Pitons is probably right up there, if not the best. Because I can think of more uses for a Hammer and Pitons than I can for a bag of sharp metal objects. Not that they're completely useless. There's plenty of things you can do with them. But I want to say that that's probably the best. Most old school D&D players are probably going to mention a 10-foot pole. Incredibly useful, immensely important in old school games. They just don't see a lot of play starting in 3rd edition. I don't even remember if 3rd edition had 10-foot pole on the equipment list. I think 3rd edition did. 3.5 I don't remember, and I certainly don't remember if Pathfinder does. But a lot of DMs aren't going to let you get away with just poking the ground in front of you with a 10-foot pole and then say, oh, no, you triggered the trap. Oh, darn, you've bypassed that encounter. They're going to say, oh, no, it needed more weight than you could have applied with that 10-foot pole. You're just jabbing the ground. This requires like a 150-pound guy to step on it kind of thing. Oh, well, enough complaining about DMs. Until next time, bye-bye.